but CSAR, combat search and rescue. So, you guys still are doing combat search and rescue in some regards, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So PR, personnel recovery, is kind of the overarching term for everything we do, right? So personnel recovery is the entire enterprise that are doing, we're talking about a rescue triad to include all aircraft inside the DoD inventory, using everything at our disposal. Like, PR is that overarching thing. When we talk about combat search and rescue, that was a term that was put specific, that we specifically put on ourselves, kind of, the GWAT, time frame. Like, we perform combat search and rescue, and that's the mission of, going into hot LZs, going into contested denied environments, and finding an isolated person in order to bring them back. And I kind of talked about it earlier, but that can really be anybody. But the classic example of this is kind of the pilot punches out behind enemy lines, and we have to go through the 5 phases of recovery, right? Like, so it's report, locate, support, recover, reintegrate, right? Those are the 5 kind of things that we do. That's no kidding what you do there. And combat search and rescue is in that really, like, recover area. That's where you're actually going and getting the person and out. And if it's in a combat environment, perfect. Combat search and rescue. And you'll see there's other search and rescue forces out there. Like, Navy has their SAR swimmers, search and rescue. We just do it in combat, which sets us apart from everybody else. We're not rescue swimmers. We're not in the Coast Guard. We're not AMTs. Like, our job is combat. We are there to take people out of the worst possible environment, access that environment, whatever it is, and then bring them back.
Right. So, and that's one of the things that you guys, I'd like to point out is that, I think in one of the episodes that we talked to Gutierrez and I think some other folks about was, a QRF, a quick reaction force, right? That is a CSAR team, a traditional CSAR team, is, 2 PJs, 1 controller. You could even, on the RQS side that don't have controllers, they're constructed a little bit differently, but it's still a small team. So a CSAR team is not a QRF. Are they extra guns to the fight? Can they bring, force multiplication and help out in a fight? Absolutely. But one thing they're not, at least as they are traditionally packaged, is not a QRF.
Yeah, we're just not big enough to roll in and bring that equipment. If we're attached to a security team, we used to call it a SAR security team, a search and rescue security team. If we have an SST that's attached to us, and maybe we have a bigger force, sure, we can protect ourselves, and then we can get our mission. But yeah, we're not a quick reaction force. Doing reactive CSAR, like you mentioned, it's essentially like the QRF is here. So here's a problem. Okay, well, we need the QRF to come in. Well, if everything fails there, and that you're like, hey, Hail Mary, we've lost somebody, or hey, somebody's really, really hurt, that's when you call the combat search and rescue team, or that's when you call the PJs. So that's how reactive CSAR works. Is big problem. It's way outside of our control. Maybe we have an aircraft that went down. Maybe we have an extrication problem. Maybe somebody's trapped, or maybe somebody's truly lost. Maybe somebody got left on the ground and we really don't know where they are. That's where we come in.
Yep. Exactly. But it's not limited to personnel. Like you brought up the pilot, typical pilot punches out behind enemy lines. Like, that's one guy, but there's other aspects of it that you will go to. So when you're on a crash site and it's a sensitive crash site, you've already covered a pilot. What else are you doing?
Well, so it comes into, we have equipment, technology, and things that we don't want to fall. We don't want to have those fall in enemy hands. So especially when you're for the pilot, we have manned and unmanned ISR assets, and there are pieces of equipment on board that aircraft that we do not want exploited by somebody to just pick it up. Because if you think, especially if you're looking, when we lose a drone in Afghanistan in GWAT, they're going to go and take that drone and strip it, but they're looking to sell that technology. They want to take these things and they want to sell it to one of our competitors. So it's important for us to make sure that technology doesn't fall into somebody else's hands. So we're doing things like making sure, number one, that we're making the aircraft safe from munitions. And a lot of times that's where we'll ask, some options there, like, hey, there's a bunch of bombs on this thing. We're going to make sure that everybody's out and we're away from it. And then the controller is going to blow it in place and call fires in on it, right? But there are some other things, like there's communication suites, there are sensor cameras and sensor balls. All of those things, and this is not OPSEC, this is just common sense. All of the imagery, all of the information that those things are taken are housed on hard drives inside of that airplane. They're housed on radios, they're housed in computers. We have to either take those with us or destroy them in place to make sure they can't be exploited by. So personnel recovery, remember that overarching umbrella, we think about that pilot punch out behind enemy lines where we have to get somebody back to friendly control. Sometimes that thing that's so important is actually a piece of equipment that we don't want to fall into the wrong hands. So we've gone after, there are many good stories about PJ teams getting spun up to both jump into the ocean to go get a drone, to, something crashed, right out. There was a time in Iraq where, something crashed right outside of base. And we were just like, oh man, we got to go get this drone, before the civilians get to it because it was armed. And then two, before anybody else could exploit that stuff.
Yeah. And a lot of, the mindset is that a lot of these crashes, whether they're, remote piloted aircraft or they're, pilots punching out, but, you tend to think that they're happening way, way deep in enemy lines. But, the most critical, phase of flight, if you will, are takeoff and landings. Believe it, for all the folks that didn't know that, most critical phase of flight is during takeoff and landing. So you'd be surprised how many of these recoveries actually take place a couple miles outside of base where they took off from. Like, it's just the reality of it.